Hey friend, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the 4 general principles that will apply and affect any landscape painting. So these are kind of guidelines or just mental notes to have through each step of a landscape painting. I've done a few different landscape tutorials on this channel and we have many more coming very soon. But I wanted to talk about the general rules, guidelines, principles, whatever you want to call them for landscape painting, because if you're new to watercolor or you're new to landscapes in general, maybe you're used to painting other types of subjects, then it can be a little hard to get your footing sometimes. So let's just talk about the general principles that you should follow when you're painting any type of landscape painting. So the first one is going to be whether you're referencing a photo of an area or a landscape that you're wanting to paint, or you're outside and you're painting in plein air. We're first going to visualize whatever it is we're referencing, photo or real life, visualize it and make note of it on our paper or canvas, whatever we're painting on. So we're making note of it. So we're adding in either sketches, or maybe you start with painting the notes of where you want elements to go, important elements. So let's say you're painting a sunny hillside in a vineyard, and you have some top ridges of mountains peeking out, and then you have some other mountains and hills here and there. We want to note where those details are. Maybe there's a river running through the middle of the painting. Let's sketch that in. So I like to use a very soft, very light sketch to make note or just have references of where my important elements, because the thing with creating a painting versus a piece of art is that we're not just replicating exactly what we're seeing. We're able to add in some sort of our own emotion, our own imagination to the piece. So I'm laying out the sketch very lightly, just making notes of where I want the main elements to go. So the hills, maybe it's the shoreline if I'm creating an ocean landscape. So whatever it is going to be slightly different, but we're making note. We're making visual note on our paper with pencil or with paint if we're not doing any pencil. Second principle is tone or values. You want to think about shadows, midtones, and your lighter tones. They're all equally important. Your darkest tones, your shadow tones, are what are going to help accentuate the light ones. So what we do is we want to work backwards. We want to start from light to dark. And so if you're doing, maybe it's a sky in the background of a mountain range, you're starting with a lighter wash and you're adding your details on top of that. Maybe there's clouds and you're adding some more depth to the sky. Or the mountain range, you're starting with a light wash first, and then you're going on top with the vineyard details or the trees on the hills. So start with thinking about your tones first and mixing that up in your palette. And so maybe you have a lot of greens, but we don't just want the same, mid-tone green for our entire range of mountains or our entire range of hills or whatever you're painting. You want some variety. You want to show some light, mid-tone, and some shadows. So think depth, think tone, and with that as well. My third tip for landscape paintings is thinking about how you're guiding the viewer's eyes through the piece. So a lot of areas that you don't want people to land on with landscapes are adding tons of details on the edges or at the bottom edge. You want people to look at the expansive middle of the landscape. And so the expansive middle, it makes it feel big and glorious and amazing. And so if you have too much really intricate, realistic looking detail on the sides or the bottom, it can look amazing sometimes, but don't overdo it. You don't want people to be distracted by what's kind of the motif on the corner. If it's overwhelming, then it's just going to distract from the rest of the background. So with your background, you want it to be more of a focal point with maybe some foreground stuff in the bottom and then on the sides, but not too, encroaching towards the middle, if you will. So these foreground elements are going to help frame the whole landscape and give a lot of good perspective. It's going to help show depth, but again, you don't want to overwhelm and take over the entire landscape painting with your foreground details. This is what's going to help create that, like I said, expansive, spreading landscape, whether it's an ocean scene where you're viewing the shoreline, or it's a desert landscape or a mountain range. You want to show some depth. You want to frame the piece with some foreground elements, but you, again, like I said, don't want to overwhelm it. So plan that out with your mental notes in the first principle that I mentioned. and make sure that the focal point of your piece that's helping lead people's eyes to the focal point of the landscape is that expansive middle ground. And lastly, since we're working light to dark, our fourth general principle is going to be detail. We want to add just the right amount of detail for the emotion and the feeling that we're going with our painting. So some landscapes are gonna call for a lot more realistic detail than others. Others are gonna just call for impressionism, and maybe it's just like a couple strokes here and there of a color that just make the piece pop. Maybe it's just a pop of brown on your green hillside, where there's a lot of dark greens, blue greens, yellow greens going on, but maybe you just add in some little tree trunks with the burnt sienna or little shadow details by the river. Whatever you're painting, that little pop of color, even though it's not tons of fine detail, it's more impressionist, is what is going to make all the difference with your painting. So take a step back after you've worked in your tones, you've worked in your background, your lights, midtones, and your shadow tones. Think about where you can add little details and really grasp the emotion of the piece and draw people's eyes into it, because they're excited to look at it, and it looks just as exciting from far away as it does from up close. Then another little bonus tip for you, while you're painting, is to think about balance. So the way you want to think about it is if there's a tipping point on your piece. So if you're painting a desert landscape, let's say, or a mountain range, you don't want everything to feel even or parallel, or maybe there's too many trees over here and it's too sparse over here. It's starting to feel like there's a tipping point or it's unbalanced. So take a step back while you're painting and always be thinking about where your elements are landing, where the colors are landing, and kind of create a zigzag with your elements and your colors throughout your piece, so that you're not just saying, there's some peak over there and we don't really see it anywhere else. And maybe the image that you're referencing or the outside area that you're referencing, if you're painting outside, does have an element that is only in one spot, then that is something to be intentional about. So just kind of keep it in mind as a reference, but not a strict guideline. Add some variety if you're sketching in or painting in your mountain ranges, like the Rocky Mountains, for example. Not every peak on that mountain range is the exact same height. So you want to make sure you're adding in some variety, some movement and depth through your sketch all the way through your last little details. There you have it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that helps you with all of your landscape paintings and helps you hopefully have a little bit more guidance. Make sure you check out all the landscape tutorials we have on this channel. We'll have a playlist for you that is dedicated to landscapes if you want to go through them all and learn all the things about landscapes. Let me know if this was helpful for you, what tip maybe stood out to you most and was most helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.